This week in wrestling history, 43 years ago this week on February 20th, 1978, Bob Backlund, before the Mr. Backlund days, Bob Backlund was the quintessential babyface in pro wrestling, and he beat superstar Billy Graham at Madison Square Garden to win the WWF Championship, ending Graham's run at 296 days, the longest run for a heel as champion up to that point. And kicking off a nearly 6-year run for Backlund with the belt. 2,135 days is the official recognized run that Backlund had with the title, if you don't count Antonio Inoki beating him for the belt in Japan in 1979. WWE does not count that reign, so officially he held the title for 2,135 days. The move that he used to kick off such a long historic title run was the dreaded atomic drop. This is back at a time when the atomic drop, the claw, the DDT, these moves could be career-ending in some cases. These moves meant something. That's how he won the championship. And it was a bit of poetic justice for Billy Graham. He had his foot on the bottom rope during the pinfall, but the referee did not see it. When Graham beat Bruno Sammartino to win the championship himself, he did so with both of his feet on the ropes for leverage, and the referee didn't see it. But even though he was a heel, Graham was starting to get a lot of cheers from people, in Madison Square Garden anyway, when he would make appearances there, which isn't really too surprising if you think about it. I mean, think about how charismatic a guy he was, and his promos. People like Jesse Ventura and Hulk Hogan, admit that they ripped off a lot of Billy Graham's stuff in terms of his flashy attire and the boas and his promo style. So when you have people ripping off your stuff, using it as their own, you know you've made your mark. But the fans were into it. So really, if you think about it, shouldn't be that surprising that the fans started to cheer for him. He pitched an idea to Vince McMahon Sr. where Ivan Koloff would turn on him, and the two of them would feud for the title, because that would turn Graham babyface officially, and then the two of them can go off and feud for the championship. But Vince Sr. never saw Graham as being anything other than an arrogant heel. He just did not think that a babyface Billy Graham would work. So he stuck to his guns, and he went with Backlund as the white meat babyface champion. 36 years ago this week, on February 18th, 1985, it was MTV airing The War to Settle the Score, which garnered a massive 9.1 cable rating, the highest rating in the network's history up to that point, probably up until Teen Mom 2 debuted or something like that. For the one match that did air on the special, there were a whole bunch of matches they taped that night, but the only one that aired live on TV was the WWE title match with Hulk Hogan defending against Roddy Piper. This show was basically part 2 of a 3-part series that started with the brawl to end it all on MTV in the summer of '84. That was where Wendy Richter, with Cyndi Lauper in her corner, won the women's championship for the first time, beating the fabulous Moolah, ending her 20-some-odd-year title reign. Then came this show, and then the following month was the first WrestleMania. All 3 events emanating from Madison Square Garden. But this was the height of the rock and wrestling era that made Hulk Hogan a megastar, made people like me a fan. Hogan had Cyndi Lauper in his corner for the match. Mr. T was in the building that night. He was in the front row. He gave Hogan a friendly fist bump, or a handshake, whatever it was, before the match. Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff, Cowboy Bob Orton were watching Piper's back on this night. Hogan won the match by DQ, because I cannot remember a single instance where Hogan actually pinned Roddy Piper. And it's pretty amazing to think about. I don't know if it was just Piper, standing his ground when they wanted him to lose. But if so, you would ask the question. I understand Piper was a big name, but what is it that Piper had, this ability that he seemed to have to avoid doing clean jobs that other people probably were not able to get away with? I haven't quite figured that out, unless they just understood Piper's worth to the company. Now, as big as Hogan got during that time, Batman needs a Joker. Every hero needs a villain to play off of. Piper was that villain to Hulk Hogan. Without Piper, it would have been somebody else, but I don't know who that would have been. Maybe Paul Orndorff. Maybe it would have been someone else. I don't know that they would have done as good of a job. Orndorff was certainly not as good of he was not as wild of a promo. He did not have the charisma that Roddy Piper had. Few people did. Ric Flair was probably one of the few. It's no wonder the two of them were such good friends. Imagine what that must have looked like, by the way. When Piper and Flair were working in the same territory or working in Portland or whatever, you go back to like the early 80s. I wonder what those nights out would have looked like in the early 1980s with Ric Flair and Roddy Piper. Just one night I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for one of those nights out. But Piper, again, he lost matches to Hogan. They were often by DQ, or he would lose matches by countout, but it was very rare for Piper to do a clean pinfall job, and nobody else with Hogan at that time would get away with that. Whether it was Bundy, Studd, even Andre, DiBiase, Savage, Orndorff, Morocco, Valentine, Volkov, Sheik. I mean, you can go up and down the list. They all lost. They all got pinned, right? The big boot and the leg drop. And somehow Piper was able to avoid that fate. But the heels were beating down Hogan, and they were starting to threaten Cyndi Lauper. In fact, Piper was kind of telling her when she jumped up on the apron, hey, get your ass in the ring. Mr. T saw what was going on, and he could take no more, so he jumped the barricade, and he got into the ring, and he ended up getting beaten down. Pandemonium broke loose. The New York City police officers trying to break things up. It was chaos. It was chaos in the ring. This set up the main event, though, the following month of the very first WrestleMania. Also on this show, Leilani Kai won the women's title from Wendy Richter with an assist from Moolah. And in a match earlier in the night with Superfly Jimmy Snuka, Cowboy Bob Orton legitimately broke his, I think it was his forearm, when his arm collided with a ring post. I believe that was a legitimate break. That was a legitimate injury. And it's what led to the cast gimmick that he used for so long. I think for years. He was using that cast gimmick. And that's the match that it came from. He got legitimately hurt in that match, to where even later on in the show when he came out with Orndorff to give the assist to Piper, he already had a cast on his arm. But that was the genesis of the Orton cast because of the injury that night. 32 years ago this week, February 20th, 1989, was the first in a legendary trilogy of matches pitting Nature Boy Ric Flair against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, with Steamboat winning his first NWA World's Heavyweight title. This was their Chi-Town Rumble match. April 2nd would be their Clash of Champions or Clash of the Champions match. 2 out of 3 falls. That match went almost an hour. And May 7th was their Wrestle War match where Flair regained the titles. So this is the classic series of Flair and Steamboat matches that you hear about. I'm sure many of you have seen them probably many times over. And the scary thing is that Flair talks about the fact that he and Steamboat had matches that were never even seen by people outside of whoever was in the building, that were not televised, that were even better than the ones that we were able to see on TV. Which is pretty amazing to think about. But I don't doubt it. I mean, Flair and Steamboat, they probably worked together, I bet hundreds, but dozens and dozens and dozens of times going back to the late 70s. Even into WCW in 1994. I think it was Spring Stampede. Then they had a match, I think, on TV as well on WCW Saturday Night. So this is really a rivalry that spanned the course of a good 15 plus years in terms of all the matches they had together. But there is a reason that fans compare any classic series of modern matches. You hear about Tanahashi and Okada in New Japan. You also hear about Okada and Kenny Omega. And I know some people are going to hear that and go, how dare you? How dare you mention the name Kenny Omega in the same breath with Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair? I'm just saying there are comparisons that are made by a lot of fans who say, okay, if you have a classic series of matches in the modern day, they will just automatically compare it to Flair and Steamboat, whether they're comparing which was better, or they're just saying, look, we're just saying that this is this generation's version of that. And you can have whatever debate or argument you want to about whether that's true or not. I'm not going to get into that right now, but it's the reason why this is the feud that is held up as sort of the benchmark. There's a reason why this trilogy here is what people hold up as sort of the measuring stick for all others that came after it. Now, Jim Ross called the match that night. This was Jim Ross just in his prime, in his element. He was fantastic. He did not like to know the match finishes ahead of time so that he could react to the finishes spontaneously. Before the show, though, he said that the booker, George Scott, grabbed him and told him, hey, we're taking the title off of Rick tonight. And he said, George, I didn't know. Like, why did you tell me that? And George Scott didn't really have any good answer. He just said something like, I just wanted you to know. So Jim Ross was not happy about that. But he said that the match was so good, and he was so into it, especially down the closing stretch, all the great drama and the near falls and everything, that he had forgotten. He had forgotten about the run-in with George Scott. He had forgotten that Flair was going to win. And that reaction that he had was as genuine as it could possibly be, and it came across that way on TV. 28 years ago this week, on February 18th, 1993, Kerry Von Erich, the Texas Tornado at the age of 33, shot himself in the chest with a .44 Magnum on his father's ranch in Texas and became the fifth Von Erich sibling to pass away, the second one due to suicide. He was facing possible jail time after violating his probation on a single charge of cocaine possession. He was also, according to his father, facing income tax issues. He had developed a really bad drug problem, which is not to say that he didn't do drugs before then, but he developed a bad drug problem after having his foot amputated following the motorcycle accident that he had. In 1986, he was trying to pass a truck and spun out of control, and he was very seriously injured. As the leg and the foot was healing, he did not allow it to heal properly. I don't know if it meant that he was just walking on it when he shouldn't have been, or he tried to come back and wrestle on it sooner than he should have. He did not allow it to heal. And that's why he had to have it amputated. It wasn't like he had the accident and then he immediately had to have the foot amputated. The only reason it was amputated is because he did not allow it to heal properly. And so he wrestled. It was kind of an open secret. His father openly admitted it after he passed away. In fact, the day that he shot himself, a few hours later, there were media people on his ranch, and Fritz Von Erich was giving interviews to the media and talking about the fact that, yes, indeed, he had his foot amputated, and he wrestled that way for a number of years, but I guess, he was always in a lot of pain. And that is where, according to his father, he developed the bad drug problem. And it was that, coupled with the tax problems that were looming and the drug charges, and he thinks it was just too much for him to bear. He shot himself with the same gun that he had bought for his dad as a Christmas gift one year. He drove to his dad's ranch that day, hugged him, told him he loved him, and said he needed a quiet spot to go do some thinking. And he disappeared for a while, and then his father realized that it was time for him to go pick up his kids, and so he went off to go look for him. And he found the car, and then he found his son. Earlier that week, a judge had signed a warrant for Kerry's arrest, and since he was already on 10 years probation for a prior drug conviction, prosecutors were looking to have his probation revoked, and they wanted to send him to prison. And the judge was told about the suicide about 24 hours after he had signed that warrant, and he gave a quote to the media and said, "It's very sad. I feel sorry for him, and I feel sorry for his family. I think it was very selfish of him." 25 years ago, on February 18, 1996, WWE hosted its 6th In Your House pay-per-view, Rage in the Cage. From the Louisville Gardens, Shawn Michaels successfully defended his WrestleMania title shot against Owen Hart in the best match on the card, no surprise there. And in the main event, Bret Hart retained the WWF title over Diesel in a steel cage match. When Diesel had the match won, he was about to crawl out the door when the Undertaker came up from a hole, not Nia's hole, but he came up from a hole in the ring and dragged Diesel down into the hole with him. Meanwhile, Bret Hart escaped the cage. Both feet hit the floor. This was also the match that convinced Kevin Nash to leave for WCW. Now think about the impact of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash leaving and going over to WCW with the whole NWO idea and where that led WCW. And this is the match that Nash credits for him making his decision to leave. Scott Hall had already made the decision that he was leaving the company. And he was either signing or he had already signed a contract or had one waiting for him with Turner. And when he told Nash initially, he goes, "Look, brother, I'm leaving." Nash said, "I'm staying." So Kevin Nash was not planning on leaving the WWF. As he tells the story, though, what he wanted to do for the finish in this match was he wanted to stick Bret with the jackknife. He wanted to hit his finish on Bret, hit the powerbomb, and then when he would go to exit the cage, the Undertaker, I don't know if the Undertaker still, would have come up from under the ring or whatever, but he would have dragged Nash back into the cage. And that would have allowed Bret to recover and then exit and retain the title. Because at the Royal Rumble 1 month earlier, Diesel had screwed Undertaker out of the championship in his match with Bret Hart, the idea was that now Undertaker would return the favor and he would screw Diesel out of a surefire title win over Bret. And he felt that it would put more heat on their match at WrestleMania 12, because it was going to be Diesel and Undertaker in the co-main event that night. And he felt that this is going to really, throw some gasoline on the fire for the match that we're going to be having. Bret Hart, though, in his view, was already going to be in the main event. So it didn't matter. Even if it made Bret look a little bit weak, in Nash's mind, you're already in the main event. You've already got your match with Shawn in the main event for the title, so, help us out a little bit, right? We're in the co-main, you're in the main, and that's how he looked at the whole situation. But he said that Bret moped around all day, the day of the pay-per-view. He had a big sourpuss on his face, and they were all in a room together during the day, I guess when they were planning things out for the match. So Diesel is in this room. I don't know if Vince is there, but Diesel is there, Bret is there, and Undertaker is sitting around as well. And they're in this room, and Bret just keeps asking, "What's in it for me? What's in it for me?" Like if they go with Nash's idea, what's in it for me? And Undertaker, who Kevin Nash said never went off like this, because Undertaker was he was laid back and cool about things. But he says Undertaker just piped up. He snapped back at Bret and said, "Motherfucker, this isn't about you. It's about me and Kev. It makes our match better." But Bret said he didn't want to do it. And you know what? I can understand Bret's position. And as much of a Bret Hart fan as I am, I've talked about stuff and comments that Bret have made before, and I've dunked on Bret. But I actually think in this situation, I get it. I get why he would have been resistant to that idea. And I'll tell you why. At the Royal Rumble, Undertaker dropped him on his head with a tombstone and had the match won. Clearly, the way that played out, you were supposed to believe that Bret Hart was done and the Undertaker was about to win the title. And before the referee could count 3, Diesel came down to the ring and he dragged the referee out to the floor. And then he flipped off the Undertaker. Remember, he gave him the finger? Which back then, oh my God, somebody doing something like that on WWE television back then in like 95, 96, that would have been unheard of. That was sacrilege. He didn't do stuff like that. It was a children's product. But it did not make Bret look strong at all. If Diesel leaves him laying here in this match with his finish, just like Undertaker did the month before, that's 2 pay-per-view main events in a row where Bret Hart looks weak. And the only reason he won is because he had to be saved by outside interference by somebody else. And then Bret goes to WrestleMania and he already knows that he's losing, right? And he's going to drop the title to Shawn Michaels. So I can see why he would have taken issue with that. And if I, in my mind, think if that were Hogan, if that were Austin, if that were Rock, I actually think Rock was probably more giving than he should have been when it came to stuff like that. But When I think of some of the biggest names in wrestling, like the other ones I just mentioned, Savage, maybe you could throw him in there. I think they would have had the same reaction. They would have been like, no, that makes me look too weak. We're not doing it that way. So I don't even know that Bret would necessarily be isolated in his, the way he reacted to this. So I get it from Bret's point of view. I actually kind of agree with Bret on that. But obviously it bothered Nash and Undertaker a lot because they just saw it as being completely selfish on his part. And they felt like, well, you're making our shit look weak. So it was at that point that Nash said he remembers he left the room when they were done. And he walked back into the arena. The fans, they weren't in the building yet, but he could see Scott was by the ring. He could see Scott Hall by the ring apron. And he just walks right over to Scott Hall. And he tells him, I'm fucking out of here. He goes, tell Bischoff I'm coming too. And it was just fate that their contracts happened to be ending 13 days apart. And Hall got all excited, because Hall, in his contract with WCW that he had negotiated, had what he called a favored nations clause, where if somebody else came into WCW, if another big name came in and made more money or had more perks than he did, the company contractually would have to match it. So let's say if Hall was going to come in and make $500,000, and then Kevin Nash negotiates a $750,000 contract for himself with X number of days off, then the company has to match that, and Hall is now going to be making the same amount of money with the same perks. So he's looking at Nash, and he's telling Nash, look, he tells him, this is how much I'm making. Okay, this is my contract, this is how much I'm going to be making. He goes, get more. Because he's no dummy. He knows that if Nash can get more, then he's getting more. But that's what led to Kevin Nash changing his mind and saying, you know what, fuck this, I'm out of here. I'm coming with you. And according to him, it all goes back to Bret's resistance to doing the finish in this match the way that he wanted to do it.